So, an interesting question came up talking about the hardware for Windows 11. So, in the presentation I did one thing. In the homework assignment, when I wrote up the stuff, it had a difference. And so they were asking me which one is right. And so, I want to talk about the realistics of Windows as an example. When we talk about the minimum requirements, so like an example here, they're basically saying Windows needs 1 gigahertz, 2 cores, 4 gigs of RAM. So, okay. So if we turn around and ask like an example of Gemini, which I did here, so it basically says the same thing. So when we're talking about the OS and stuff, so this is the bare minimum we need to make it run. But in real life, would this be something we would choose? Like an example, would we, choose a 9-inch screen with 8 bits of colors, So, so there are different requirements. So basically, this is the minimum that we need to make it boot and run. So here we're talking about the trusted platform, the TPM, the 2.0 version, 1 gigahertz. We're talking about at least 2 cores, that are 64-bit compatible, minimum 4 gigs of RAM. Here, you know, the the Plex server, or not the Plex server, but the Proxmox server does 35 gig. So it seems like there's not necessarily a minimum standard for the actual storage capacity because, I haven't really seen something embarking like we did 45 gig instead of 64 gig. So it didn't seem to be complained, but there are some hard factors like we got to have the UFI, we have to have the TPM. We need to have a minimum hardware spec for the processor. So, like an example here, we need this is the important thing because we have to have at least 1 gigahertz with an 8 gen or a Verizon 2000 series processor because in the hardware itself of the OS, when it sees the hardware, if it doesn't meet these specs, it won't install. So, could we always have more? Yes. So, like an example, I asked AI earlier what is the minimum hardware, which basically maps to what Google or Microsoft's webpage says, the book says basically. And then here we're talking about here's the other if we're going to use Copilot. So we want the PC with the Copilot. Here is the thing that we are looking for. So we need a AI compatible. What that means is we've talked about TOPS in the hardware class. We talked about TOPS in the last 104, if you had me for 104. So we're talking about basically the Snapdragon series processor, the X series, the Intel Ultra line. Now there's an Ultra line. That means you have the Intel Core Ultra, you know, i7, i5. That means it has the AI TOPS in it. So we need to have that. And then you need the AMD AI 300 series graphic card if you want to use the Copilot portion. But here now I asked what is a usable computer hardware specs, and here's what they say. Here's the official bare minimum again, and here's where they're changing it. So they're changing it from running to 16 gigs to 256 gigs, and they're also talking about going to an SSD and saying basically they're saying the processor is the same. Again, it just depends on what we're building. So again, here Copilot is, now we're adding the NPU, the neural network processor, and we're going with more RAM. And basically we're talking about you still need the TPM 2.0 and the secure boot. So, and then here we're talking about, 64 gigs, again, preferably an SSD, but, so let's see, let's ask it now. Let's ask it what makes a good All right, let's see. How did I word that earlier? Scroll up. All right, so I just went Windows 11 gaming. And let's see how that turns around and takes it. And let's see. So here we're saying an entry level mid-range components and a little bit an entry level mid-range. So they're going with a RTX 4000 graphics card. So here they're talking about some of the different key features. We want more storage to store games. That makes sense, right? We may want some HDR, take advantage of the the high def coloring, scheme. Again, so we might want to do advanced shading. Again, these are different things that we may want to do. We might want to do, some ray tracing, some other things. So again, so what's truly the minimum specs is what you're going to run the machine. That's really the key thing. So if we are, building this to play games, then we want better hardware. Again, if we're just playing solitaire, then we can go with the bare minimum. So that's kind of giving you some different ideas of answering this question. Again, truly, it's what are we doing with the PC? Like an example, since we're doing some very basic labs, we don't necessarily need very sophisticated hardware. So sure, we can do 2 cores, 4 cores. I'm just thinking, far as how many people at the same time are building a lab. If we got more people at the same time, I just think it makes it easier to do 2 cores instead of 4 cores. So this way, you have more for everybody to use. So that was my thought process on that. But in real life, I probably wouldn't build a machine in my own situations. If I wasn't doing a lot of games, 16, because now the price of RAM and storage has gone up so much because of AI. Before 2026, in 2025, my specs would have been 32 gigs of RAM because also I want to run VMs and stuff like that. So if I'm running virtual boxes on my machine, 32 would be my starting choice. And then a gig of storage because I got a gig of storage and I'm still running out of space. So those are, things that you have to take consideration because some of the stuff or some of these motherboards we're getting where everything's being soldered on, you don't have much of a choice. You have to, purchase it the way you truly want it because you can't upgrade it because you'd have to basically take the motherboard out and put a new motherboard because the motherboard, especially these for the Copilot stuff, like an example, when they're talking about the Copilot here for the AMD machines, AMD does not have a socketed AI processor yet. It's a mobile chip. So therefore, you can't replace the chip. So you have to get it at the speed you want it. Maybe in the future, it'll be a socketed chip, but right now they are mobile chips. And the same way with some of the ultra, some of those could be socketed in mobile chips too. So it just depends on which one you are going with the Intel. So they both have their pros and cons as far as the Copilot thing. You know, so hopefully this kind of answers. I just wanted to make a short little video discussing this. So again, it's really how much RAMs. Like an example, you can see I probably got over 25 tabs sitting there open. That's why I have 64 gig OS or 64 gigs, so I can open a gazillion tabs and look effortless. But that's the key. You need to, the more RAM you have, the more tabs you can have open. So hopefully that answers the guys' questions about this. But yeah, so this is just a short video to kind of highlight this as a separate talking point. So if anybody, had questions or anything, hopefully this will answer it. All right. I'll see you guys in class or online.